was.
Welcome back. Tonight we're sitting with something that tends to stay with people. Home invasions. Not the loud, dramatic kind you see in films. The quiet kind. The kind that makes you look at your own front door differently afterward. 3 accounts. All of them unsettling in their own particular way. She heard something outside. Most of us would tell ourselves it was nothing. She didn't have that option. Here is what she told me. My bedroom window was open 2 inches, and the screen had been pushed inward from outside while I slept 4 feet away. I noticed it at 6:55 a.m. when the curtain moved wrong. The screen doesn't bow inward from wind. It bows outward, away from the room. And this one was bent toward me, creased at the bottom corner like something had pressed against it with steady pressure. The crease was sharp, deliberate. The kind you'd make if you pushed with a knuckle or the heel of a hand and held it there. I live on the ground floor of a rental house on a quiet street, the kind of street where nothing happens and everyone assumes nothing will. My bedroom sits at the side of the house, and the window faces a narrow passage between my building and the wooden fence that separates the property from the neighbor's yard. That passage is maybe 4 feet wide. It's always in shadow, even on bright mornings. I got up, the floorboards cold under my bare feet, and looked through the glass. The passage was empty, still and gray and smelling faintly of damp soil and old wood. The gravel down there was disturbed in a long, irregular patch, like something had been standing there and shifting weight for some time. Not an animal circling, something upright, something that rocked slowly, heel to toe and back again while it waited. I called my landlord, not the police, which I regret. He came by that afternoon, looked at the screen for about 30 seconds, and said it was probably an animal. The crease was at 5 feet off the ground. That night I locked the window and wedged a cut piece of wooden dowel in the track so it couldn't be slid open. I checked it 3 times before bed. Before I lay down, I noticed the small wooden chair in the corner had moved. Not far. A foot, maybe less, angled away from the wall in a way I didn't remember leaving it. I told myself I'd moved it without thinking. I told myself the room smelled faintly of something I couldn't name, something that wasn't damp wood, and then I stopped thinking about it. The streetlight outside threw a thin orange line along the bottom of the curtain, and I lay there watching it, telling myself the street was quiet, telling myself the landlord was probably right. I fell asleep sometime after midnight. At 2:14 a.m., I woke to a sound outside the window. Not loud. A slow, deliberate scraping against the exterior sill, like something testing the frame, the kind of sound that isn't accidental. I did not move. 14 seconds, left to right. I counted every one. Then nothing. The orange line at the bottom of the curtain didn't shift. The house was completely silent. I stayed still for a long time after. When I finally reached for my phone to call someone, the scraping came back. It was faster this time, and it was coming from the wall beside the window, not the sill, which meant whatever was out there had stepped closer to the building. Close enough that I could hear the soft shift of gravel beneath its weight settling. I called 911. I stayed on the line, crouched behind my bed with the lamp on, the carpet rough under my knees and my hands shaking badly enough that I had to hold the phone with both of them, until I heard the patrol car pull up outside. Officers found fresh shoe impressions in the gravel directly below my window. 2 sets of prints, both pointing toward the glass. One set faced the window. The other set was behind it, closer to the fence, and the officer said those ones were facing outward, like someone had been standing there watching the first person. 2 people. I had only heard one. I stayed at my sister's place for a week. When I went back for my things, I found the wooden dowel on the floor inside the room. The window was closed and locked the way I'd left it. The dowel had been removed from the inside. Some stories have explanations you can almost reach. This last one has never had one. He started keeping a record. Small things out of place. He thought it would bring him clarity. It didn't. This is what he found. Every morning for 6 days, there was one more mark scratched into the inside of my basement door, and I had made none of them. I rent a 2-bedroom house by myself. I use the basement for storage. I am down there maybe once a week. The house is older, mid-century, the kind with thick plaster walls and floors that creak in specific places you eventually memorize. The basement always smells faintly of mineral water, and something older beneath that, a damp, cold smell, like soil that never fully dries. The marks were thin, horizontal lines grouped in sets of 4, with a diagonal fifth across them, the way you count days. When I first found them, I stood on the basement stairs and counted slowly. 17 marks. The wood around them was soft pine, the kind that splinters if you look at it wrong, and each line had been drawn with enough pressure to peel back a thin curl of fiber along its edge. I did not go further into the basement that day. I came back upstairs, locked the basement door, and tried to remember the last time I'd been down there. 8 days ago, maybe 9. I had not seen any marks then. I do not sleepwalk. I spent the rest of that afternoon sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee that went cold, trying to construct a rational explanation and failing each time I got close to one. I went back the next morning with my phone flashlight and counted again. 18. The scratch on the 18th mark was pale and fresh, the raw wood still bright compared to the others, almost luminous in the thin beam of light. Something in my chest went very still when I saw that. Not fear exactly, not yet. Something quieter than fear. The basement has one small window near the ceiling, painted shut from the outside, undisturbed, the latch sealed with at least 2 layers of old paint. The only door is the one from inside the house, which I'd locked. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The water heater ticked. Something in the wall settled. There was no other sound. I contacted a friend who does property inspections, and he came out 2 days later. He went through the entire basement methodically, the joists, the crawl space access panel in the far wall, the utility area behind the water heater. He found no signs of entry, no disturbed dust except my own footprints, and this is the part I keep returning to, the floor directly beneath the scratched door, where anything pressing hard enough to peel pine fibers should have shed debris, displaced grit, left some trace of itself. That strip of floor was oddly clean, cleaner than the rest. He noted it without explanation and moved on, and I did not know what to do with that either. He checked the door itself and said the scratches were made from the basement side by something with a narrow point, pressed at roughly consistent pressure, at an estimated height of between 4.5 and 5 feet off the ground. He said they looked recent, but he couldn't date them. I watched his face while he said it, looking for some flicker that meant he was downplaying something. There was none. He just looked tired and careful, the way people look when they don't want to say something out loud. I had the basement door replaced with a steel core door and a keyed deadbolt that same week. I kept the old door wrapped in plastic sheeting and stored in my car. I thought about calling the police, turned it over for 2 days and decided I had nothing that would mean anything to them. No framework that made sense outside my own head. I checked the new door 3 mornings in a row and found nothing. The steel surface was cold and smooth each time I pressed my hand to it. I slept a little better on those nights, though not well. I would wake at 2 or 3 in the morning and lie still, cataloging the sounds of the house and deciding each one was ordinary, which is its own kind of exhausting, that relentless auditing of silence. On the 4th morning, I found a single, fresh mark on the door frame beside it, not on the door itself, about an inch from the lock. The wood there was old and unpainted, softer than the door had been. The line was clean and deliberate. Whatever was counting had moved. It already knew where the lock was. It had always known. Some things announce themselves through accumulation. Others prefer to make themselves known through something far more intimate. Sometimes it isn't what someone takes from your home that troubles you most. Sometimes it's the small, careful signs that they were simply there. This is their account. 2 glasses sat on my kitchen counter, but I live alone and had only used one. Not something I could explain away immediately. I stood in the kitchen doorway in socked feet, staring at them. The gray early light, making everything look slightly wrong, the linoleum cold even through my socks. Both glasses were from the same set, both placed near the sink, both holding a small amount of water at the bottom. Mine was on the left. I knew that because I always set mine on the left, always had. A habit so automatic I never thought about it until that morning when the habit suddenly mattered. The other one was 6 inches to the right, and the rim had a faint smear near the lip that was not lipstick and not a watermark. Something dull and slightly opaque, like the ghost of contact. I stood there listening to the refrigerator hum and the sound of my own breathing. I told no one. I washed both glasses. I went to work. I spent 8 hours convincing myself I had poured a second glass in my sleep, which I had never done before, but I needed something to hold on to. Something ordinary and slightly embarrassing that I could slot into the gap and move on from. I got home at 6:40 p.m. The deadbolt was locked. I had turned it myself from outside that morning. I remembered the specific resistance of the key, the way the cylinder caught before it gave. The deadbolt was locked, and yet I stood outside my own front door for 4 minutes before I went in. The hallway smelled the same. The faint trace of my shampoo and old wood, and everything looked the same. Nothing had been moved that I could see. I didn't sit down for dinner, couldn't put my back to the hallway. Ate standing at the counter, plate in one hand, eyes on the corridor. Then I checked the rooms. Every room, every closet. I pressed my hand flat under the bed, feeling for warmth that shouldn't be there. Nothing. I checked again. Nothing. I started sleeping with the chain on, and for about a week I almost let myself believe it had been nothing. A bad morning, a tired mind making patterns out of coincidence. Then I noticed the photographs. I have a row of framed photos on the shelf above my desk, 6 of them, facing forward toward the room, the way I placed them when I moved in 2 years ago. And one morning I walked past and something felt slightly off about the shelf, a wrongness I couldn't immediately name. So I stopped and looked at each frame individually, moving slowly from left to right, and when I reached the third one, a photo from a hiking trip, I saw that it had been turned 3 or 4 degrees to the right, not fallen, not knocked, but deliberately rotated just enough that it was no longer looking straight out at the room. It was aimed at where I sleep. I told myself calling the police about a turned photograph and a smudged glass would sound like nothing, because it was nothing except that it wasn't. I checked my door camera footage from the previous 3 nights instead. The motion log showed a single trigger at 2:19 a.m. on the second night. The camera had captured nothing. The lens had been covered, precisely and briefly, with something flat. A thumb, maybe. Whoever it was knew exactly where the camera was and had approached from below the frame. They knew the angle. That meant they had studied the door. That was the only explanation I could make fit, and it was already more than I could hold. I moved out 11 days later. Those 11 days were the longest of my life. I kept the lights on. I stopped sleeping through the night. I listened to every sound the building made and tried to separate the ones that belonged to it from the ones that didn't. The property manager told me the previous tenant had handed back both sets of keys before leaving. Both sets. I never found out where the second glass came from. 3 stories, all different, all sharing one particular quality. They happened to ordinary people in ordinary homes, on ordinary nights. That's the part I find hardest to set aside. Think on that. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.